This will strengthen energy security in parallel to the decarbonization of the economy and the creation of jobs and sustainable development. Next slide, please. So I wanted to stop here to leave with a couple of questions. We are trying to engage the community. That include how fast we can create more demand for green hydrogen. How fast can we couple the development of the hydrogen infrastructure with renewable energy? How fast can we ramp up the electrolyzer manufacturing capacity? Because today there is a huge need to scale up 6 times the current markets to achieve the targets. How can we reduce the cost? We see a tremendous reduction of cost of a green hydrogen manufacturing their option, but how can we increase the rate of cost reduction? And also, very important as well, how we can collaborate around quality and standards to harmonize the trade of green hydrogen across region, including within Africa. So I will leave you with this, and of course the last slide, if you can go to the last slide, IRENA is involved in a continental analysis related to the energy sector and supporting the African Union and the NEPAD agency around the continental master plan, which include green hydrogen options for the continents. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great panel today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. I completely agree. Green hydrogen has appropriate end users, and it's important not to cannibalize these users. There are sectors where it's much easier to do direct electrification as opposed to using green hydrogen. I would like now to go to the segment of our discussion. This is the moderated panel, and I will welcome the speakers. Mr. Ahmed Amir, Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, COP27 presidency, to please join the stage. Ms. Anya Kaspar-Barata from KSA, Uri Epstein from FFI, Eugene Mfungwa from PACJA, and Ms. Kalin Newman, co-founder, Climate Action Platform Kenya. Testing. So we're going to go into the moderated discussion before breaking into a Q&A with the audience. So it would be really good if you do have any questions after the speakers have made their submissions to ask and leverage their presence here. And I would also like to recognize the presence of Honorable Cabinet Secretary Keriako Tobiko, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Kenya, from being in the audience. And this is a very interesting discussion, and it's generating a lot of interest from participants. So I would like to start with Ahmed. It's not just because Egypt is hosting the COP27, but because we really are interested in Egypt's ambition in catalyzing up on the market. And I know Egypt has a long history of being a hydrogen frontier, also energy frontier. So I would just like you to touch upon how is Egypt continuing this legacy with green hydrogen. If case you have any plans and strategies, I think everyone in the room, the panel, would like to know more. So I'll pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Jabri. I'm very happy to be with you here and with all the esteemed panelists. Let me first say that I'm going to talk in two capacities. First, as a diplomat at the Foreign Ministry, and as well as presidency for the COP. I'm going to talk about, really, to tackle your question, it's a bit complicated, but first two main axes, one at the national level and what at the COP and at the global level. So we have all agreed that we need to decarbonize the energy industry in general. And as Jean-Paul was mentioning in the morning, just before me, that we have to ensure that this transformation is done in a just and equitable manner. So in order to do so, the green hydrogen, in our opinion, has the potential to play and to has the potential to be a catalyzer to achieve the net zero targets that we have committed. So at the national side, Egypt are working on diversifying its energy. So we have this 2030 strategy, which is aligned with the 2030 agenda of the UN, and it pays great attention to new technologies and to renewable energy in general. And we have initiated recently a national working group to discuss how to incorporate hydrogen in the energy source, as an energy source. As you said, Egypt has a big experience in hydrogen in general. It has been producing hydrogen for the last 20 years, and currently it is ranked fourth in the production of hydrogen-based fertilizer. So the goal is to have low-carbon hydrogen to mitigate the climate change at the country level and to move to the clean and renewable energy. So to do that, plus the national working group that we are developing, we are currently working on a national strategy for hydrogen that includes the different ministers to more or less have like a unified approach in tackling this new field of technology. And recently, the cabinet of the Prime Minister has approved a set of legislation and incentives for investors, especially the private sector, to attract foreign investments in green hydrogen in the Suez Canal economic zone. So this is more or less at the national level what the country is doing. And I'm happy to announce as well that we have an Egyptian company called Orascom, is working with a Norwegian company, Scatec, and they are planning going to be the first developing country to produce green hydrogen, and hopefully we have this kind of production prior to COP. So as well at the national level, we have seen recently, as John Paul was mentioning, that there are a lot of MOUs being signed with private sector as well as with the countries that are interested to produce hydrogen in Egypt. But unfortunately, till date, the implementation of projects on the ground is very limited. And the project that I was just mentioning, it's like a pilot project, and it's very incented by private sector and as well by countries in order to just have this first kind of production. So that shifts us to your question regarding COP27 and how we plan as well to tackle this issue that not only Egypt is facing, but more or less a lot of developing countries are working on, and they are facing numerous challenges to produce hydrogen at the national level. So we have identified more or less, as Jean Paul was saying as well, the challenges that are within this new hydrogen sphere. And we are aware that there are as well a lot of initiatives that tackle the hydrogen perspective, whether the Green Hydrogen Council with more than 130 private companies working on the topic. We have the Alliance of the African States, another alliance for the MENA region. We have the Ministerial Energy Council, which is as well being moderated more or less by IEA, the International Energy Agency. So there has been a lot of work that has been done in the last maybe few years in the field of hydrogen. However, we see that moving from the phase of signing MOUs to actually implementing projects on the ground, especially in developing countries, is lacking. So let me just as well put some numbers in that term. So the production of gas, hydrogen from gas, the range of price is between $0.5 to 1.4, depending on the price of gas in the country. And if you use CCUS, the price increases from $1 to $2 per kilogram. If we use renewable energy to produce hydrogen and green hydrogen, the cost jumps from $3 to $8 per kilogram. So this huge difference makes it hard for developing countries to really find the incentives and the potential to move towards this new energy system. One of the challenges as well that's mainly faced by the private sector is the storage issue of the hydrogen, the certification issue in some of the countries where we have seen recent certification issues, especially in the EU, as well as the mobility and transportation of the hydrogen to the world. So we anticipating that these challenges are going to diminish in the future, but in order to move forward to meet the the agreements and the targets that we have set together. It needs to be fast and to move really quickly from the phase of just signing MOUs to the phase of actual implementation on the ground. So in that regard, we are proposing, and we are currently working with some of the partners to have like a global forum of green hydrogen producers. This is mainly based on a mapping that we have recently done, including the African alliance that you are representing today. And the initial objective of this forum is to encourage the implementation of global projects, to facilitate and inform policies, and to transfer of technologies between the countries. Moreover, as well, to have this match and demand, more or less mixture and networking between the match and demand between countries. This global forum, it has the idea to take the form of a public-private partnership, so it's going to include countries as well as private sector investors, as well as international organizations similar to IRENA, IEA, and the UN organization working on the topic. So I identified more or less that this kind of global forum that has this private sector as well involvement is not there, and this is missing. And we are trying to leverage COP happening in Egypt and on African soil to bring this forum into life and to really move from the phases of having just signing MOUs to actually having projects on the ground. I stop here. I will be happy to respond to questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. I do have one more question for you, but before I just also want to thank Egypt for joining the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance as one of the co-founders. I have one more question, but before that, I would like first to pass the microphone to Anya from Conrad Adenauer Stiftung. I know KSA has a lot of active programs on energy security and climate change. So I would like, if you can articulate, can you tell us what Africa maybe can begin when they're structuring the green hydrogen market, what are some of the pitfalls and the challenges that they might experience that maybe has been reflected in the fossil fuel sector, and how can they avoid some of this pitfall? Because a lot of African stakeholders get told a lot that they can leapfrog away from dirty fuels, but a lot of Africans also know they need to know where the frog can land after it leapfrogs. So maybe what are some of the pitfalls and how can we manage this transition? Over to you.
Thank you very much. I would probably like to rephrase the question a bit from my observation, what I would think is appropriate, because obviously as a non-African, I wouldn't be in a position to tell you what to do. But I think a lot of aspects that are very necessary to make this a success story have already been told. I just want to highlight that it's, I think, very important to make step one before step three. We've seen this, you can call it a gold rush or rush in this moment, that a lot of African countries would like to have their national hydrogen production and are trying really to be the first to put something out. But at the end of the day, very few countries will be able to do it in a cost-competitive way. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that and really look for regional cooperation. And I'm very glad that UNECA has put that out or is emphasizing that, and that there are some alliances on the African continent, because I think that it's super crucial. That you look really at the whole value chain. One country might be better positioned to do one thing, and then another country can jump in and do something else. But let's not arrive at the point where over 50 countries have a national hydrogen strategy and without communicating with each other. I think that is very, very important, and therefore I would like to stress it again. I think, the gentleman from Egypt has alluded on that. It's super important to have data. You mentioned the price between $3 and $8 per kilogram. That is a huge margin, and even a very much smaller margin will be decisive if you can produce cost competitive or not. So that is very important to get the data right when you make this analysis. And also just to remind everyone that hydrogen development cannot be really separated from the broader energy landscape, and we have heard that also. So there is obviously this huge opportunity with the African Free Trade Agreement, and within the African Free Trade Agreement also lies the African electricity market, where it is foreseen that African countries will cooperate closer, establish a single market, and then that will also be more opportunistic for smaller countries that otherwise would not be so attractive for investment if they're integrated in the market. But that means also touches upon some very unpopular subjects like infrastructure and regulation. That obviously in the whole hydrogen discussion might not sound very sexy, but anyways, you have to tackle them first. And then another aspect that I think is very, very important also is really the socio-economic context. So you can look at the technical aspects, the cost of the land you have available for solar or for wind parks, the water. But what about really the social economic dimension? Are you making sure that you're not taking away land for agriculture? How fragile is the situation? You might end up getting technical data for how to produce hydrogen very cost effective, but you've never looked at the fragility. And that makes it obviously at the end of the day very expensive if you're looking into some areas that are very volatile. So I think that is very important. Obviously getting the environmental impact assessment before you plan, in order to not play out climate aspects with environmental aspects is obviously also very important. And probably the last point, and I don't want to be too negative, but as I said, when you're talking about gold rush, I think it's also very important to keep the expectations realistic for the society. We heard about energy transition, and obviously there needs to be a local content, there needs to be local value creation, there need to be jobs and economic opportunities. But not everyone that is working in a coal mine will be able to become an engineer for hydrogen, and that needs to be communicated, I think, in a very transparent way in order to not create disappointment at the end of the day. I think I will stop here for the moment, but I'm very, very much looking forward also to engage further in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya. I also do have a second question for you that I will come back. I actually have two questions for each panelist, but thank you for mentioning the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. The only issue that we've been hearing about is the agreement actually does not mention climate as a concern. It doesn't mainstream climate as a trade consideration. And also thank you for mentioning the socio-economic environmental aspect of it. A lot of communities need, if any extra renewable energy, additional renewable energy is produced to generate green hydrogen for export markets, that it needs to be additional, and it needs to electrify rural population, provides desalinated water, etc. Because even for African governments, green hydrogen is a domestic wealth creation opportunity, not just for export markets or to decarbonize the global north. With that, Yuri, I'd like to pass the microphone to you. I know you work for FFI. FFI has had multiple MOUs with countries and has communicated a lot of ambition about leveraging green hydrogen to transform the market. So I'd like just to know, from your opinion, what enablers need to be put into place in Africa, within African governments and the African region, in order to take advantage of the full extent of this green hydrogen potential. So the enablers that needs to be put in place.
Thank you. I think in my mind there are two main enablers that we need to think about. The first is getting manageable green hydrogen standards on a global level. I think at FFI we're partial to the ones that were proposed by the Green Hydrogen Organization. Getting a standard that can be translated globally that will allow you to ship your hydrogen, ammonia, or any other derivative to any continent will help. It'll enable you to get sort of a stable pricing. It'll become a commodity. That's one key enabler that will come out of it. The second one is national policies to support the demand creation, right? Whether it's subsidies for green hydrogen or not penalties, but additional charges on non-green hydrogen. It doesn't have to be for the long term. right? We know that the pricing will come down quickly. We think by 2030, pricing will go down by about 75% from where we see it as now. But to enable the production of electrolyzer facilities, to encourage new production of wind turbines, of solar panels, the equipment that's necessary to produce that green hydrogen, we're going to need some type of subsidy to support us initially, to enable us to act quickly. That's sort of how we see it. And it's been mentioned a lot throughout that we need to get the sort of the just energy part of this as well. Right? We're talking about gigawatts of installed energy that needs to be created, most likely more than what the country has installed for itself. As part of what we install for green hydrogen, we can also provide electricity for local consumption. It doesn't all have to be exported out. We can offer desalinated water as part of our not byproduct, but part of what we produce for green hydrogen is we need desalinated water, or distilled water actually, but we can provide potable water as one of the avenues or one of the byproducts of developing our projects. So we feel that it can all work together, right? It allows for new job opportunities, right? If you're removing coal from the grid, you need to provide those people with new opportunities. We can train individuals in that area. And I think it's important to speak specifically about what my company does as Fortescue Future Industries. We're a clean green hydrogen energy generator or producer. But at our core, we're a mining company. We as a company, we're the fourth largest iron ore company. Globally, we shipped, I think, close to 200 million tons of iron ore last year. Our carbon footprint last year was just over 2.2 million tons. That's almost double what Fiji was. But we made as a commitment as a company a couple of years ago through our chairman and our board to be completely carbon neutral by 2030. So FFI was formed initially to produce green hydrogen and electricity to abate our mining sector completely. So we've made investments into our train, so we bought into technology that will help us reduce our carbon output and by 2030 be completely carbon neutral. But we found the technology and we can utilize that everywhere. So I apologize, I lost my train of thought there for a second. But as a company, we've committed to become carbon neutral by then, and we'll be producing hydrogen to support sort of the global demand that will come out of it. And with that comes the jobs, the trainings that, as a company, we've done that throughout our 17-odd year history. We're the largest employer of Indigenous Australians behind the Australian government. We've made that commitment to also train, hire locally in any country where we develop our projects. So it's part of our plan for that just transition. It's not only generating green hydrogen, it's providing training and job opportunities.
Thank you so much, Yuli. Thank you for also acknowledging the emissions that certain, obviously the company work for, just recognizing that this is public information. It does help to kind of ensure climate action is taken more rapidly just by acknowledging the emissions that it takes to run that business. So I think that's important. And also, I think you're right, community engagement by developers is absolutely essential. And with that train of thought, I'd like just to pass the microphone to Eugene, who's representing the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. Eugene, we've just heard from a project developer. I'd just like to hear your perspective representing civil society voices in across 48 African countries. So can you tell us how PACTURE is mobilizing the consortium that you have access to support green hydrogen production and also green hydrogen use in Africa? Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Now, thank you very much for inviting us and making us part of this conversation. As you point out, our work essentially at Pan-African Climate Justice is to ensure that the solutions to the energy crisis and the environmental crisis generally are just, they're centered on people,
and that people are not left worse off by the choices that we make. And you would guess that would very much inform my thoughts on this question. I want therefore to move the discussion away from the technological, the economic, and even the environmental appeal of green hydrogen and nuance it a little bit with a climate justice perspective. Because the reflections we are having are looking at what's going on through the eyes of ordinary African people and asking ourselves, what does this mean for us and for them? Now, let me say a few things so that I can build my case, which is not entirely new to anyone here. It could be repetitive, but allow me, because without that I won't be able to build my case well. The one thing I want to note here is that the energy transition discussion, generally speaking, is often framed as emission reductions, and there's a good reason to do that. If we agree that the energy sector accounts for up to 3/4 of global emissions, it seems plausible that the best way to deal with the climate crisis is to get these deep cuts in emissions from the energy sector. But the African continent experiences a set of circumstances that require an integration in this broader discussion of transition. And I'm going to get to green hydrogen eventually. Don't bother that. I may be taking too long to get there. And I just want to highlight 3 of those circumstances, which is not new to any one of us. The previous speakers have mentioned bits of it. And the first is the problem of energy access on the continent. I don't want to repeat the numbers, at least not in a room of people who deal with these issues every day. But in a sense, pun intended, Africa is a black continent. With all of these people who are going to bed at night without electricity, with all of these women who don't have access to clean cooking, that's a huge problem. In fact, energy poverty is a sub-Saharan African problem. 75% of everyone in the world without electricity lives here. So that's really our problem. And one of my colleagues tries to paint a picture each time he has this conversation and says, it doesn't really matter whether it's green hydrogen or it's solar or it's wind. You can't ask a hungry man to choose between a vegetarian meal and a non-vegetarian meal. It's not a question that they consider. They're just hungry and they want to eat. And I think for most African people, they just want to be able to have power at home. They just want to be able to turn on their fridge. They just want to be able to dry their crops. And the full scale of the energy gap on the continent, I'm not sure we are communicating it well. I think in this room just a couple of days ago, someone was talking about the problem of cooling. How crops' food is damaged because farmers are unable to cool and hold food for a long time to get to the market and eventually to plate. So there are huge problems across the health sector, across access to food, and so on and so forth. Now that's the first circumstance the continent is facing. The second one is that energy decision making on the continent is currently in the hands of a few. It's powerful states and a handful of powerful multinationals. And again, with green hydrogen, those who are championing the technology and the production are the same multinationals whose approach to business hasn't been beneficial to Africans in the past. And we're worried that perhaps if we don't pay attention to this, yes, we will get a transition, yes, we will get a deployment of hydrogen, except that people will still live in darkness, there's still going to be energy poverty because the business models that are driving this transition do not respond to the needs of these people. Thirdly, as the lowest, with the least levels of industrialization in the world, Africa only accounts for a few, couple, 2, 3, 4, depending on who you are quoting, of global emissions. Now, let's not lose sight that if we are citing this figure, we also must remember that it's because of the low levels of industrialization in Africa. And so there is a need to speed up industrialization in Africa. There seems, in my view, to be a direct correlation between our ability to harness and use energy and our ability to industrialize. Without that, it's impossible. So, in my view, these three things, there are many more, must be considered in this discussion about hydrogen. And the point I'm making is that it will be an error, if not unwise, to reduce the energy transition debate in Africa to a transition from one energy form, and I'm now narrowing down to green hydrogen, to another. To us, it's really about the transition of the governance of the energy system, the ownership and control, participation and access. That sector is very opaque. In Africa, it tends to be very corrupt as well. If we replicate that, it doesn't matter whether we're bringing power from the moon, the problems that African communities are facing will still be there. And a number of questions that we are asking, and I'm wrapping up now, and one is who owns and controls the technology and the infrastructure needed for green hydrogen deployment? Who participates in decisions about who gets what, when, at what cost? Again, one of the reasons, and the economists in the room would probably agree with me, that many communities have a power line passing through their villages but live in darkness is because there's no return on investment from those communities. And the last question is, how quickly can this transition occur with the least disruption to the current problems that the continents have? But also, what then do we do in the meantime? And this opens up a whole question about what is fair, what is just in this process. And I don't want to veer the discussion into the current debate about a return to coal and gas in some parts of the world, where it seems to us that we can move forward and backward depending on what suits us, but insist that others move in a new direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eugene, for broadening the conversation. That is absolutely always welcome, and adding context, but also maybe most importantly, like humanizing the green hydrogen conversation. It can feel very abstract at times, and what does it really mean? So thank you for that. And I also do have one last question for you, but maybe Caroline, I think it's always interesting to have a private sector lens or non-state actor entity lens into this conversation. And I am genuinely interested, what is your perspective about the promise of green hydrogen in Africa, and how do we structure this market in the correct, most appropriate way to kind of, as I've said, maximize the potential and kind of actualize green new economy? So maybe just to keep it short and really...
Thank you. I prepared a reply to that question, but I cannot leave Eugene's challenge on the table and not build on it. So I'm going to fly by the seat of my pants and see if we can build on each other and have a conversation here. So firstly, I cannot agree more with you that Africa has a very low level of industrialization and that needs to grow. In fact, if Africa were to grow to middle income status with the same footprint as current middle income status countries, the world would add 12 gigatons of emissions every year by 2050. We can kiss our climate goals goodbye if that happens. That's not an option. Regardless of what the rest of the world does, regardless of whether there is now a retreat to coal, it's not an option for anybody, because it's the African people that are going to suffer the consequences first and foremost. However, it's also not an option not to grow.
what are you doing? Please, like I'm really trying to engage, and I agree with you. It's not an option not to grow. But a lot of the implicit messaging from the global north to Africa is, hey, if you can just stay in a corner and like stay poor, because then your emissions will stay low, and then like that's the only answer we'll have for you. So we fundamentally believe that Africa must and will grow. It's not something that can be stopped anyway, that anybody automatically controls anywhere, in a low emission way. The green path is the only path for Africa. The fact that the continent has very low installed base industrially and very little industrial emissions helps, doesn't hinder. In a way, if you think about global development as a swimming race, and bear with me for a second, this weird metaphor, where we're trying to cross a pool, touch the other side and turn back and see who wins. And reaching the other side in this metaphor is developing on fossil fuels, traditional industrialization path. Africa's way behind everybody else. But who said you had to reach the other end of the pool? Who said you couldn't just turn around, swim back and win that race? Who said you can't get to industrial growth and development without fossil fuels? So that's the real invitation and challenge that we put on the table. Can you get Africa to go onto a path to middle income status without the same emission intensity that the rest of the world has had? And there I think green hydrogen and a number of other initially export-driven options can be accelerators. But they won't automatically be. I agree with many of the challenges that many of my co-panelists have put on the table around how you manage this and the power balance in getting it right. But one of the weird things about energy poverty is the following paradox. Africa has some of the biggest untapped renewable potential in the world. It also has the largest number and proportion of population without access to energy, and it has some of the highest energy tariffs in the world. It's a really weird combination. That combination makes for, if you ask industries, would you like to come and set up shop in Africa, to often say, well, the energy is not reliable enough, there's not enough of it, and it's too expensive. And a lot of the focus on solving energy access is on either how do we divide the small pie that we have, how do we make sure that it goes to people with energy poverty first, or on trying to run a lot of small projects, because many of the efforts to try and get energy poor people online are small projects. Whereas the way to unlock that paradox is big industrial anchor demand that makes renewable energy generation bankable. You speak to any investor and any developer of renewable energy generation, whether it's wind parks, solar, geothermal, and their biggest concern, the biggest challenge, and the biggest thing that delays their projects is we don't have any off-taker but a national grid and a national buyer. If we had big industrial offtake, like, for example, green hydrogen, we could get these projects financed. And guess what? That will grow your renewable energy supply in the country. The world over, rural populations' access to energy is subsidized, is cross-subsidized in energy systems. A rural American doesn't pay the full price for his or her energy. So why should we try and connect the non-connected Africans on an hour line just based on their community? They should be cross-subsidized. They should be cross-subsidized by big industrial demand. Now I realize that picture can feel like I'm, on a silver cloud or like airy-fairy and I may not be in connection with the challenge. I recognize all of the challenges that exist around the power imbalance, around the information asymmetry, both between the affected communities and the industries, but also some of the governments and the industries. There's information asymmetry as well there, which drives a distrust. But I fundamentally believe that green industrialization is the path forward, and that big industrial anchor demand will unlock renewable energy generation. And green hydrogen can play an important role in that. And as such, I would invite African countries to embrace that as an opportunity towards developing the continent in an inclusive way. Not a real answer to your question.
No, thank you so much for that perspective. And no, it's always welcome, Caroline, to speak so freely. And no, thank you for that. I think that answer was better than my question, so thank you for that. We are running out of time. We have about 10 minutes left before we pass to the audience for questions. I have 5 questions for 5 panelists. That means if I have my math correct, that's 2 minutes each. Ahmed, maybe I'll start with you. Please remember, it's just 2 minutes, it's 120 seconds. In your opinion, I know you touched about COP27 and green hydrogen, but what really is that key African message at COP27 to world leaders coming to Sharm el-Sheikh as it pertains to green hydrogen? What is that key one strong message on green hydrogen in Africa?
Well, I mean, maybe I can spoil that, but we are working as well to have the leaders to talk about green hydrogen and to support the work of developing and emerging countries working in that regard. So it has a potential, but as my colleague and my brother were just saying, it's very important to take into consideration the just and the affordable access as well to energy into that. So this is mainly our main focus in that regard.
Thanks so much. That is, I think you used 10 seconds, so thank you for that, Ahmed. Anya, you next. How do you see the benefits of green hydrogen for local communities in Africa, but also, I know Yuri spoke about this, but in your perspective, what are some of the enablers that are needed to make this community benefits more widespread? Over to you.
Thank you. So I think it's a mix of what we've heard from Eugene, and the difference, and that is probably also, occurring to your first question, difference between, let's say, the exploration of fuels and oil, and the potential production of hydrogen and renewable energies that you will need for that, can really be that the countries profit from it, because you know that the resource curve, a lot of countries in Africa are very rich in resources, and the community has not profited from that. And for hydrogen production, it can really change, because 99% of the renewable energy of Africa is untapped. That is more than 99%. And if that energy would be available, because it makes economically sense to use it for hydrogen production, the communities would benefit from it. I'm 100% sure. And it is, of course, the task of the civil society to make sure that when hydrogen projects and MOUs are signed, to really, ask the governments, the local politicians in the constituency, what are we getting from it? I know that, for example, in Namibia, that is one of the pilot projects currently, besides Egypt on the continent, that there were some provisions that it needs to be clearly stated how many workforce will be coming out for Namibians, and that's one of the conditions for the company to get the job. How many Namibians are getting a job from it, and why can that not be a provision in many other countries? And that will obviously help communities a lot. And then we have the usual suspects, but nevertheless, they need to be repeated. There needs to be knowledge transfer. Avoid thinking in silos. The information that are available need to be broadly available, and there needs to be technology transfer, and companies should really train, as Yuri said, the local population, that we're not in this situation where the technology is really locked and not accessible to the local people.
Thank you very much, and I completely agree. Something that the Green Hydrogen Organization is also working on is equitable contracting, ensuring contracts have those equity clauses within them to benefit everyone in the supply chain. Yuri, how can green hydrogen support decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors so that Africa can achieve its climate goals, but I think more importantly, its development and its wealth creation goals?
So I think to what Caroline and Eugene were talking about, right now Ford is building a new Ranger plant just outside of Johannesburg. Right? Every Ford Ranger that's going to be used outside of the U.S. would be built there. Why shouldn't we be building green hydrogen facilities in South Africa, in the region, taking the steel, the iron ore that's found there, using green hydrogen, creating green steel, adding value in Africa, and then exporting that out. That's how you're that's the just transition. And that's what we need to push for. It's there, it's shipping, it's hauling, those are the hard to abate sectors, but we can create value locally and ship that out. We can industrialize.
Thank you very much, Eugene. Eugene, maybe over to you. I really like what you said last time, so even if you want to deviate from the question, I welcome that as well. So, in your opinion, what stakeholders need to be involved in decision-making before kind of green hydrogen projects are signed and implemented? So, anyone who needs to be involved, how do you engage them, and which stakeholders should be part of the decision-making process?
Okay, I think everyone is guessing that I'm not going to answer that question without responding to her. And don't get me wrong, there's no question in our mind that there's no future for fossil fuels. The question we're asking is how can that transition be fairer? The questions we're asking is, now, just transition is an ethical moral question rather than a technological and scientific question. And the science and the technology, we understand it, it's clear to us. But what troubles us is you need to stand on a moral high ground to make an ethical shift and ask for a moral shift from someone. The argument that we shouldn't make the same mistakes isn't enough if you're not doing what you should be doing, and that's the point I was trying to drive. I was not at all suggesting that there's a future for fossil fuels in Africa, not at all. And I think that's the moral challenge that our northern counterparts need to face a little more squarely and look themselves in the mirror and ask themselves if it's right to leave a home that was heated with gas and come to Africa to ask people to live away from gas. It's really more of a moral, ethical question than what we need to do. Now, to your question, I think as I pointed out in my initial remark, the energy sector generally, again, is controlled by a handful of people. It's Ford, it's this multinational, it's Mitsubishi, it's Total, it's still Shell, the same people who have been on the continent for 60 years. And that has not helped the African people. One of the reasons is because, again, when those decisions are made, the African people are not in the room. So we need to democratize the energy space, and that means participation of people at all levels of society. Communities should have a say in what kind of energy they receive. There's a principle that's guiding our climate action these days, the needs-based approach to things. Let's perhaps also find a way of operationalizing that in this discussion about energy transition. Let people ask for what they want, participate in finding the solutions, and please let me not go without saying this. There's a lot of talk about potential, and sometimes I wonder what they mean by there's a huge potential. Take green hydrogen. What's the potential in Africa? Is it the abundance of fresh water, or the technology, or the money? What's the potential that needs to be transformed? What is the potential? The sun is not renewable energy until the technology is introduced into the equation. That technology doesn't exist in Africa. So let's nuance our insistence on the huge potential on the continent. The sun has been here since before colonization. That hasn't changed the lives of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. I think I'll let you write your own questions in another panel. I'm Callum, just the last question to you before break. I think the audience might have a lot of questions. So there's, I think the element of partnership is obviously pertinent to this conversation, and there's partnerships between the national governments and any stakeholders. How do you think these partnerships can inform potential of countries in the production and use of hydrogen, and maybe is GAPE supporting any of these partnerships? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. So I keep coming back to this question of information asymmetry and the question of trust. There's a reality with many of the climate action innovations, be it green hydrogen, be it all of the derivative processes of green steel and green fertilizer and synthetic fuels, or be it some of the more sophisticated removal options like direct air capture and enhanced weathering, etc. In all of those, we're seeing an industry structure where very sophisticated players, just like FFI, are meeting government counterparts who have a much broader agenda and set of responsibilities that they need to cover, and may not be as versed in all of the details of what's being put in front of them. And that creates, at the very least, the basis of a distrust, because there is a very long history of Africa's resources and natural resources being exploited in a very bad way. So somebody coming and asking you to do something with your natural resources, you will be cautious because you've gotten burned many, many times. So, and that is partially for the industry to resolve, because it has to have patience, partially for the governments to resolve, to quickly get up to speed, and partially that's a role that many system orchestrating actors or philanthropy can play to help those actors come to the starting line of the discussion with a more of a level playing field in terms of understanding. So one of the things that we are doing is working with some, and this is for example the direct air capture space, working with some governments that have a lot of potential there, and say, we will help you understand what this means, we will help you think through what your business models are, so that you feel prepared when somebody comes knock on your door and wants to have a negotiation on a contract. And we don't have any stake in that contract, we're not even in that conversation anymore, but we'll just help you get to a point where you're comfortable having that conversation and you're more informed. And I think that solving that information asymmetry and solving that, which is one of the kernels of mistrust, not the only one, is probably key to building these partnerships in a very equitable way.
Thank you, Colin. I'm completely aligned with that. We have about 10 minutes left between the session ends. I think we can pick 3 questions from the panel. I'll just walk, and more than 3, I guess. Maybe we'll take the questions. Natalia, over to you.
Yeah. My name is Mao Emis. I'm the Executive Director of the African Center for Green Economies, a think tank based in Cape Town, South Africa. My apologies, I just walked in when I think Ms. Cullen was speaking, and you say that the energy transition is anchored around big industries to push demand and therefore access. But unfortunately, the story we're seeing in South Africa is quite different, because 80% of the South African population has access to the grid, but 47% is regarded as energy poor. And the work that we're doing in the Northern Cape province, where a lot of these renewable energy companies are actually located, is that we have mega plants that are actually feeding directly onto the grid. And those communities in the Northern Cape are unemployed, impoverished, with no energy access. So I would agree with that gentleman that a lot of the energy transition issues is about moral issues as opposed to the technology. That's my input. Thank you.
Should we take the questions and then answer? We'll take questions and then.
Merci à mon orateur. Je me présente. Je suis M. Michael Akanga, je suis membre de la société civile, président de l'ONG Akanga et Fils, la Nouvelle Étoile, résident au Gabon, consultant. Alors, merci à tous les panélistes pour votre brève présentation. Je voudrais poser une question concernant l'énergie renouvelable, le développement durable par rapport aux jeunes. Pour le projet, comment allez-vous faire pour les accompagner dans les différents mécanismes, et par rapport à leur projet, est-ce que vous pouvez les soutenir financièrement? Est-ce que vous pouvez aussi mener des enquêtes et donner des formations à ces différents entrepreneurs? Merci.
Merci. Vous me permettez de répondre en anglais, parce que la plupart des gens n'ont pas de traduction, ils s'entendent en anglais. D'accord, merci. So the question, for those of you speaking English who didn't have the translation ready, was how will young people benefit from this energy transition and these big industrial developments, and will there be training, will there be support for businesses run by young people, etc. So I don't have a readily available answer, because many of these things we're figuring out, and I would actually love to hear also from a project developer. But since you directed the question at me, I'll start and give a beginning of an answer. It will have to. Okay, let's start there, right? The vast majority of Africa is under 30 years old. So anything that ignores opportunities for African youth is doomed to fail. Now, at the same time, there needs to be that recognition that I think Anja spoke about sort of realistic expectations, that some of the skills requirements for some of these projects are not requirements that are held by every single youth. So yes, you need to invest in training. You also need to understand that job opportunities for youth need to be across an entire chain of skills, from the very sophisticated that may become the engineers leading some of these initiatives, to less heavily skilled and trained youth that maybe can work in some of the supporting industries that, you know, as industrialization creates wealth, it also creates consumer demand for more of regular services. Small businesses can spring up in hospitality, in B2C. So it's the flywheel of a local economy, and that really needs to focus on youth. But it would be unfair to say the tens of millions of youth that need new jobs are going to find them in green hydrogen factories tomorrow.
Thank you. My name is Ronald Balimweza from Uganda. I'm a policy maker. Not all of us are experts in green hydrogen energy. I'm not one. And therefore I expected you to define green hydrogen energy. How do you extract it? It's a new concept to us, and we are policy makers. We have to go out there and do something in our countries. But we know nothing about green energy. Can you please define green energy, green hydrogen energy?
No, I'm happy to. So for us,
It's joint, so I can just follow. My name is Ruth from Kenya, and we have supported Kenya to do an analysis on the potential use of green hydrogen for different sectors. But this is very much linked to what he says. Most of the NDCs have identified green hydrogen as an option, but we haven't costed. We don't know if it's possible. We don't know, what we are talking is actually guesswork, because it's there, it's a fancy word. So how are we, and I expected this to come out in the presentation from Irina, to be honest, the advancement of technology in green hydrogen, the cost of production using green hydrogen, and accessibility of it. Who's going, and most of these questions also have been raised before from Eugene and the other panelists. I've also talked a bit about it. So if we are really talking about green hydrogen as a potential alternative source of energy, we also have to be realistic and move away from the talk of academy and the speaking amongst more people. I mean, it's like a cocoon of experts.
So I would say for us, green hydrogen it's hydrogen generated from renewable energy sources. So for us, it's wind, solar, geothermal, and hydro to a certain extent, depending on how that hydrogen is generated. Utilizing that to electrolyze water, which splits it into hydrogen and oxygen, and that's how you get green hydrogen. That's our determination of what green hydrogen is. Looking at the Green Hydrogen Organization, the standards will give you the listing of, how many grams of CO2 can be utilized per kg of hydrogen that's produced. That's sort of where there's distinctions drawn between Europe, between Asia, between the US. But that's where it's also important that if we get a global standard, it will help. And that will also help get the pricing sort of normalized across the world. I think in terms of the costing, it's difficult to determine today, because it depends on which resource you're utilizing, how efficient that resource is. Is it baseload? Is it geothermal or hydro? Is it more intermittent? Do you need battery storage?
How do you store it? All those questions come into what that final cost will be. As we advance over the years, that cost curve will go down. But that's where I was mentioning before, if we have some subsidies or some help initially, that will help, sort of generate that demand, grow the production of the equipment that's necessary to produce the green hydrogen, and it will help bring that cost curve down. But, yeah.
Hi. Working? Hi, I'm Makalia from United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Thank you so much again for all your insights. Mine is actually more of a comment than a question. It's just very interesting how, and this has been a thread in the past couple of days, the whole just transition debate. And sir, I really do feel, I'm from Ethiopia, so I really do feel, I sympathize with what you're saying in terms of how the debate does need to be democratized, and in terms of what needs to take place during the just transition, it really, I feel, really needs to be a holistic effort. And IRENA has done a lot of work in that. There's a lot of focus on the energy system per se, but it's really not going to work unless you have all facets. So you need to have your institutions, the labor side, socioeconomic, industrial policy, what's going to happen with people, going to be job creation for those that have less. So unless this is really seen as a holistic effort, the transition in terms, it's just won't take. And I think it's really crucial at the end of the day. Yes, sustainability is the future. It's not really a question of should we transition or shouldn't we transition as African countries. There really is no choice. We are heading towards a clean energy system, and we have African countries, we need to get our act together, and we need to strategically position ourselves in that dynamic, because otherwise we're just going to be swept away. So the thing is, countries at the end of the day, by definition, the transition is going to be different in each and every country. Nigeria just launched an energy transition plan. They have a very clearly costed investment plan of how they want the transition. And gas is a very big part of that. And it's not that African countries are saying, let's just go fossil fuels. The thing is, IEA recently did a study, and they said if all of the gas-producing countries were to exploit their resources, and they're not all planning on doing that, but if all of them, let's say, worst case scenario, we're going to do that, it's going to increase our emissions by 0.55%. So we need perspective here. And Africa's not saying, let's go fossil fuels forever, because you've got your stranded assets issue, and we are the ones that are going to suffer the most because we are the most vulnerable, right? So it's actually going to hurt us in the long run. But the thing is, we're just saying we need policy space. And as the COP presidency was saying this yesterday, all energy, green hydrogen is going to play a very big part of this. All of the energy sources should be in the equation. Ideally, but the majority of that percentage will be renewable, because that really is what you're going towards, so you don't want to spend on things that you're not going to waste, you know what I mean? But the thing is, each country has to determine that, and each country needs agency. So when people say, we're being told to do X, we're being told to do Y, no, as a country, you need to determine, you need to state what you need, what works for your country, and put that out there. So when you accept investments from countries that are coming in, be it the multinationals, etc., don't accept investments that are not going to help you long term, that don't have a holistic framework, and that don't really fit in with the vision that you have. So just to kind of add I think everybody has incredible insights, but it's just, it's complex, and each country needs to determine it for itself. Thank you.
Hello, Ruth from Canon Brooks Foundation. Hi Eugene, great to see you on the panel. We've collaborated quite a bit on just transition, so thanks for your perspectives. I have a general question. I've read some analysis that the best use case for green hydrogen is actually as an industrial feedstock and not in the generation of electricity. And so I'm just wondering whether you guys have any perspectives on that, because that does have very important implications on just transition, because as Eugene just mentioned, that the need in this continent is electrification, right? More than, industrialization is an important thing, but electrification is actually more, I guess, more urgent. So I just wanted to find out whether you have any perspectives about really the best use case for hydrogen, vis-a-vis, like electrification vis-a-vis it being an industrial feedstock.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that everybody should read if they haven't already is the Green Hydrogen Ladder by Michael Liebrich. It goes through where should you start abating green hydrogen, so it's the hard to abate sectors, it's feedstock, it's fertilizer, it's green steel, and then you can work your way down. There are certain areas where green hydrogen doesn't make necessary sense to be utilized, but generating green hydrogen doesn't preclude generating green electricity for usage. There's enough renewable energy availability in Africa to provide it all, in a sense. Right? You've got Morocco with wind, you've got Namibia with solar, you've got geothermal in Ethiopia. There's enough resource. It's obviously the bigger part is finding the capital to build all of it.
Thank you. I think that is a very pertinent question. And I think my answer, or my thoughts, it's probably not an answer to the problem. But what I think is, we're going to, and I agree with her, we're going to somehow have an energy mix, even if it's a mix of renewables. And some can be deployed to solve different problems on the continent. And that's how I see the role of hydrogen. And I strongly believe that we've spoken a lot about the need to develop Africa. And in the conceptualization of development, it's about poverty alleviation, it's about healthcare, with all this free access to education, universal access to healthcare programs. And for a long time, we have not talked about the industrialization of Africa. I think green hydrogen has the potential to do that. The questions that remain unresolved are those just transition questions that we have raised here, which I think we should have a serious conversation about.
Unless there are any other questions, I would like to just close this session. If possible, it would be good to get a round of applause for our panelists. I know it's a difficult job. And also, just to close, I would like to thank everyone for the disagreements, for the provocations, because that means we've had a genuine conversation and not just a presentation. So thanks everyone, and close the session. Thank you, everyone.